Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast. Today's entrepreneurs are mental athletes that have to know about the mind and how to keep it fit. Our goal is to increase our resilience against stress and anxiety, optimize our productivity, motivation, and optimism by learning about the human mind through psychology, neuroscience, and human behavior. I'm your host Ozan. I'm a founder who has experienced the challenges of launching and growing a business and a keen student of human behavior over the last 15 years. I'll share with you what I know and learn. Hundreds of impactful, behavior-changing ideas are waiting to be discovered by us. Let's begin now. Hello and welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast for Entrepreneurs. I'm your host Ozan, and today I would like to discuss with you a very interesting finding that I came across. This is from a researcher Micheal Freeman from the University of San Francisco, focused on the mental health crisis that is raging, and takes a unique look at the entrepreneurial community. And according to the study, approximately 49% of entrepreneurs suffer from at least one form of mental health during their lifetimes, and these include things like ADHD, bipolar disorder, and host of addictive disorders. Freeman's research shows that startup founders are twice as likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from ADHD, 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse, 10 times more likely to suffer from bipolar disorder, twice as likely to have a psychiatric hospitalization, and twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts. Dr. Hokemeyer goes on to add that in my clinical practice, I see the percentages in the range of 80% of entrepreneurs who struggle with a host of personality disorders such as narcissism, what he calls sudden wealth syndrome. That's the first time I heard of it, but I think that's quite an apt description, and the imposter syndrome. Have you felt any of these? Have you experienced any of this? I think it makes sense sometimes to take a look if you are currently feeling better, which is really nice. But I think it makes a lot of sense to do a small retrospective and understand what you went through. And I think the theme of today's podcast is learning from the past. And I think this is particularly important and something that we particularly neglect as startup founders, entrepreneurs, because we try to live in the present. There are many problems to solve, and what keeps bothering the mind usually is a concern of future, a fear almost, or an anxiety about the future. And this is particularly because this is the type of job where uncertainty is at its highest. So it needs people that have high tolerance for ambiguity and unknowns, and that brings more anxiety about the future as a result, because of those all unknowns. That unpredictability about the future really has a cost. But because we are so focused on the future, sometimes it is very difficult for us to take stock from what has happened in the past. And particularly, if you're an entrepreneur, and if this is not your very, very early days, you have experienced a few hardships by far, and you most likely made it through some of them. So I think it makes a lot of sense to look back at the situations and difficulties you had and how you came through them, because how you came through them in the past is also a blueprint of how you can actually get over them in the future and improve yourself, and also how you can deal with the current present effects of what you're experiencing. So personally, looking at this list, and the listeners of this podcast would know I have a background in psychology, which goes which goes back even further than my university days. Back in high school, me and a few couple of close friends took a psychology class. Like we thought it was really interesting, and then ran into the writings of Irvin Yalom. I'm probably pronouncing his name in the wrong way, but like the existential psychology aspect of his writings were incredibly influential to how I started thinking about the human mind. And then that was the starting point of my interest. So I know a thing about ADHD, bipolar disorder, host of addictive disorders, not at a clinical level, and I would never attempt to do that, but I know of them as their areas of interest of mine, and I took classes, and I have worked in an organization which provides psychological therapy and counseling to both children and adults. So I've had some exposure. So I do, in a way, have the added advantage of being able to diagnose these through the symptoms if I would have started having them. And I know what areas I'm particularly vulnerable. Like with bipolar, that's not something I actually have a big problem with. I don't have these huge depressive or manic episodes, but ADHD is something that I know I have suffered as a child, and I remember my parents having conversations with the teachers like that this child has difficulty concentrating in class, etc. And I think that was at one time perhaps one of the reasons I would not be able to, like, it was the biggest risk factor if I were not to complete my studies. But I think I found a way to get over that in the past, and it makes sense to know how I overcame that. And I remember, not very clearly, but I remember the feeling of, if I followed my genuine interest in something, and then I would be able to focus hugely and deeply on that topic. So in a way, I have interpreted the fact that I was diagnosed with ADHD in a positive light, and turned that around. And like the narrative within me that I told to myself was, okay, you are interested in many things. You'd like to experience and sample a lot of things, a lot of new experiences. So you have the license to go out and do that. So that's the internal conversation I had with me. And as a result of that, as I became an adult and started working in a professional career, it actually stopped working because when you're in the university, then you have all this free time and the license to explore your interests. And what I did was I explored diving. I played American football. I tutored students. I translated a book. I did a double majors with another degree. I took master's classes. I learned to play new instruments, played new games, went around, toured around, did sailing, and all these other things. So it was particularly interesting for me. But when I started working full-time in a larger organization, then it meant focusing on a single thing, which became an issue for me. Like I felt that my insides bubbling in a way. I don't know if you had that feeling, but that was quite tough for me. That was quite... I've never particularly understood the reason back at the time that I had to... I decided to do that basically, but I changed 4 jobs over 4 years. And I think that has most to do with the fact that over 1 year and that job itself has lost the learning value. So like my ADHD would kick in. So what I did was, rather than seeing this as an issue, I decided to see this as a strength, right? The fact that I have good amount of energy, good amount of creative energy to do stuff. So I started to see this as an advantage, and I think that has played a part in me making the jump to entrepreneurship. And there are different types of entrepreneurs. Like, entrepreneurship is not a single title that encompasses everything. It has different dimensions, and it really depends on the person. It needs to fit to you like a glove. So what I'm going to say is not a suggestion, is not a guidebook, but it is what has worked for me, and I would urge you to understand your psychological composition, your mental composition, and actually consciously, like a puzzle matching problem, try to find ways, try to find a strategy which works really good for you, taking into account the psychological dimension. Like, that's the whole point of this podcast, isn't it? When we are building a business, or when we decide to be entrepreneurs, we try to design the best structure, the best system for the growth of the business, for the income, for revenue. We try to design our time, and among this confusion, sometimes we forget that one of the factors that we have to take into consideration is actually our psychology, our mental composition. So, like, this is another suggestion for you to perhaps take a note when this podcast ends, for yourself, to just spend half a day thinking about your psychological composition, and take that into consideration while you are designing your life and your business around. So for me, like, having the ADHD and knowing that I would really love to sample different tastes and flavors, I was okay with being a jack of all trades and master of none type of a person. Like, I think that was one of the conclusions, and I felt at ease with that. I saw that as a richness, and I gave myself again the license to be okay. I would like to write books. I would like to experience what it is like to be in the process of writing a book, and what it is like to be an author, feel like an author. So I went ahead and did that, and when you are an entrepreneur, there is nothing you can stop that can stop you. There's no one who's gonna say you cannot do this. Like, that's the best thing with becoming an entrepreneur. And I went ahead and did that. Did I get what I was expecting? Was it worth it? Absolutely yes, because I was not expecting anything. What I expected was to experience that creative process and that identity. So I went ahead and did that, and while I was working on it, I decided to become at least dedicate a certain portion of my time to becoming a keynote speaker and working as a facilitator for learning in larger corporate organizations. And I went ahead and did that as well, and it taught me a lot of things, especially in interaction design and learning design, which I think is a very valuable area. And then I wanted to build more technological products, so I went ahead and did that. The lesson for me here is, focusing on ADHD, you have the power to actually design your life around your mental well-being and your mental composition. So I think that's the biggest takeaway from this. There are other things that are potentially worth exploring and discussing with Dr. Hokemeyer's research and how entrepreneurs struggle with things like personality disorders, narcissism, sudden wealth syndrome, and the imposter syndrome. And perhaps we can go into detail in the future episodes. But for this one, I think we're running out of time. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll talk to you in the next one.